A noise, a thud in the distance broke Khana out of her daydream. Khana couldn't place where the noise had come from, so she just went back to her work, assuming it was nothing important. Khana sat alone at her desk and began quietly sorting the returned books from the day before, marking the name of the person who borrowed them off her list, and checking for any damages before moving on to the next book. Her library was small, but the townsfolk were very respectful of the books and almost always returned them on time. There was, of course, that one run-in with the Williams kid, but one good stern talking to seemed to do the trick. It may have been an accident, but that's no excuse for dropping a book in the river. The doorbell of the library chimed, and a familiar man waltzed into the room. If there was a person who loved books as much as Khana, it had to be him. It seemed to her that he would come in once every few days looking for a new book to rent. Of course, Khana always had a good suggestion to give him.
Oh, hello, Khana. How's the afternoon treating you?
The man asked, a smile on his face. Without looking up from her ledger, Khana answered,
Quite indifferently, actually. I didn't quite like the ending of the new Bugbear Chronicles. I just wish they would wrap up a plot instead of leaving a million cliffhangers like they always do. It makes the wait for the next book even more annoying. The twist didn't make much sense either. I mean, how could they make her dad, who she watched die, be the villain? Ugh, it's maddening.
Khana, realizing she had just talked for way too long, put down her pen, looked up at the man, and said,
I'm sorry, Merrick. You probably don't care about any of that. Are you here to return your books?
Merrick quickly responded,
Nonsense. I enjoy listening to your thoughts on books. That's how I know you give the best recommendations. Yes, I am here to return this,
he said, placing a thick tome onto the counter. Khana took the heavy book and looked it over. It was almost exactly as it was when she handed it to him, in perfect condition.
So, what did you think?
Oh, it was, amazing. I could hardly put it down.
I can tell. You finished this almost faster than I did. Who was your favorite character?
Oh, it was definitely Oscar's friend Francis. I loved him.
You do have a certain love for characters who die in the first few chapters, don't you?
Yeah. Anyways, I'm ready for your next recommendation. What do you have for me?
Of course. Give me just a second. I'll go grab it for you.
Khana stood up from her chair and walked away from the desk. There were only a few small rows of bookshelves, so it never took her long to find the book she was looking for, but as she approached the right shelf, Khana was stopped dead in her tracks. In front of her, sprawled out on the ground, was a person, adorned in colorful robes. Each panel of fabric, of which there seemed to be hundreds, was a different color. Reds, blues, yellows, every color of the rainbow scattered in a random pattern. Some pale, some vibrant, some dark, some light. It almost looked as though the person who made the cloak was trying to put every color thread possible onto it. The person didn't move. They didn't make a sound. They just lay perfectly still. Khana quietly began to examine the person. She flipped them over so she could see their face. When she did, she gasped, almost screaming at what she saw. The person was shriveled, like a fruit left in the sun too long. It looked like their insides had been sucked out of them. It was horrifying and disgusting to look at.
Is everything okay over there? Do you need help finding it?
No, just stay where you are. I'll be right over there in just a few seconds.
Khana decided to leave the body where it was for now. She didn't want to involve Merrick in this whole situation, and it wasn't like it was going to get up and walk away, so she grabbed his book off the shelf and headed back towards the only entrance of the library.
Here's that book. It should be a great fit for you.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Khana. You're always so helpful. Say, what about if I repay you with dinner sometime?
She so desperately wanted him to leave that she didn't even hear what he said. She just responded.
Sounds great.
She grabbed him by the shoulders, turned him around, and began pushing him out of the store.
Sorry, but I have some important things to take care of. Please come again soon.
She pushed him all the way out the door, changed her sign outside to say closed instead of open, shut the door, and locked it.
Okay, I'll come by tomorrow so we can schedule our dinner. Good night.
Merrick yelled at the door, but Khana was not there. She was in the back of the library, beginning to close curtains and making sure no one could see inside. Khana calmed herself, took a deep breath, and began to walk to the section where the body was. The body was still there, in the exact same position she left it in. Having quickly come to terms with the dead body on her floor, she began to investigate it more closely. She found two things on him. First, a small tome, royal purple in color with shiny embroidering that seemed to change color depending on the angle you looked at it. Khana immediately opened the book but found its contents strange. The writing was in a language she not only didn't know how to read, but it was unlike anything she had ever seen before. There were symbols that looked magical in nature. Maybe they were runes or something, but she couldn't be sure. The second thing the man had on him was a glass orb, the size of Khana's hand. It seemed fairly simple, empty, boring even, but something inside of Khana told her that it was important. Khana wasted no time taking the book and the orb over to her desk so she could begin to study it and understand what they meant. Before she could get to studying, though, there was a body to deal with. She walked over to where the body should have been, only to find a pile of ash in its place. Khana was confused. Who was this person? How did they die? Why were they in her library? What is this book she found? Nothing made sense to Khana. Her life up until this point had been ruled by logic and knowledge, yet none of that helped her explain this phenomena.
There has to be a logical explanation for this,
She said to herself. And so she got to work, researching about this book. She grabbed item after item off her well-organized shelves and brought them back to the desk. She opened up a book looking for any information on this language or the symbols that she didn't understand. She rifled through the pages frantically, looking for anything useful.
Damn it. Nothing.
She said out loud as she turned in her chair and placed the book behind her. She may have been frantic, but she wasn't about to damage a book.
Maybe this one?
As she picked up the next and began quickly turning through the pages. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. A customer had come to return a book, but the door was locked so they could not get inside. Khana looked around her, only to find stacks of books surrounding her like a fortress. As she got up and opened the door to let the customer in, Khana could see the morning sun rising in the distance. Somehow, without even noticing, Khana had stayed up the whole night looking through books, and it was now the next morning. After letting the customer in and opening the library for the day, Khana sat down and began looking back at her notes. She had already begun to fill small notebooks with notes and things that she had learned. The writing, as she had thought, was arcane in nature. From her translations, she could tell the pages contained the exact instructions for how to cast magical spells. Slowly but surely, she had begun to understand the words on the page. She had translated the name of the spell.
Dancing lights?
Khana said out loud, imagining two figures made out of light doing a tango on the library floor in front of her. She was delighted with her progress and knew she was getting close to cracking the code. She didn't dare think about stopping now. She resumed her research. The hours continued to pass. Customers came into the store to return their books, and a few even waltzed through the shelves looking for new books to read. In the late afternoon, Merrick walked into the library the same way he had done many times before.
Oh, hello, Khana. How's the afternoon treating you?
He said as he passed through the entrance, although he could barely see the top of Khana's head within her fortress of dictionaries, novels, and references.
Wow, that's a lot of books. Everything okay, Khana?
She didn't even notice he was there. She just kept reading, turning through the pages, and taking notes.
Khana? Everything okay? Geez, you're really in the zone, aren't you? Can you even hear me?
Khana's face was unchanging. It was almost like she was in a trance, and nothing could break it. Merrick continued trying to get her attention, even poking her once or twice, but was unsuccessful.
Well, I guess I shouldn't get in your way. I'll come back tomorrow to schedule our date. I mean, dinner. Ah, maybe it's a good thing you didn't hear me.
Merrick left the library, feeling defeated. Khana was still so engrossed in her research that she had no clue he was ever there. By late that night, she was so close to finishing she could taste it. The power of magic was at her fingertips. All she had to do was follow the instructions, and the power of dancing lights would be hers. She began working even harder. In no time, Khana was ready to cast her first spell. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Khana began, shakily chanting words she barely understood, and moving her hands in a way she had only just learned, and focusing as hard as she could. Over and over again, she said the same words and did the same movements. growing more and more confident each time. Eventually, she began to feel an energy build within her, something foreign yet exciting, some power coursing through her body. She could feel it move and manipulate through her hands and fingers as she did the motions, and transform as she said the words one last time. Suddenly, in front of her, several orbs of light appeared, lighting up the dark fortress of books she had created around herself. Khana could hardly believe what had just happened. As she moved her hands and focused, she was able to make the lights dance around and move where she wanted them to. Her eyes were wide at the majesty of these lights. This magic she herself had created. She had cast a spell. She had deciphered the writing and learned how to use magic. She had never felt so proud of herself. As she looked around the room once more, she noticed that the glass orb she took off the corpse had changed. It was no longer empty. Instead, on the inside, there were clouds of color, ever changing. Parts of the cloud would change and cover each other, and many hundreds of colors converged on themselves to create new ones, which then changed into other colors. It was similar to the cloak the wizard had been wearing. Hundreds of colors of all shades, saturations, and vibrancies, connecting and changing. Khana's hand approached the orb, wanting to examine and understand its potential. The moment her hand touched the orb, however, a brilliant, bright flash of light enveloped the room, and Khana was momentarily blinded, unable to see a thing. Slowly, her eyes came back into focus, but Khana remained dazed as she was not in her library anymore. She was somewhere very different. She was alone in an immense open space, and in every direction she looked there were hundreds, no thousands, no millions of small threads. Some were close by, others were far away. Some were thick, some were thinner. No two threads were the same, and each one had a unique color. Khana peered at the thread closest to her, getting her eye right up next to it. She began to see a child no older than 5 sitting on a chair, eating dinner. Khana moved her head slightly further down the string and began to see the child age rapidly before her, becoming a teenager. Moving further, they became an adult. Moving further, they were elderly. She was seeing a lifetime play out before her own eyes. Khana looked down at her feet, only to see that she was standing on a thread of her own. Unlike the other threads, though, hers was not one color, but instead ever-changing, like the clouds within the orb. She began to follow her own thread, looking forward on her timeline. As she looked up, however, she noticed it. In the distance, all the threads, every single last one of them, converged onto one point. A darkness. An end. A void. Khana could tell that no thread continued past that point. This darkness felt a million miles in the distance, yet Khana could tell it was getting closer. Inch by inch, this void was catching up with the threads. Khana peered into it, and as she stared into nothingness, the silence in this space became deafening. There was no noise. There was no movement. Khana could see nothing within this void, and yet within that nothingness, she could feel, deep within her, that something was there. Something was there. Something was there, watching her every move, waiting to catch her, waiting to kill her. Khana couldn't move. She was mortified, paralyzed in fear. She could barely breathe. She couldn't think. She could only stare in horror at this void. She used all of her strength, all of her will, everything she had to shut her eyes tight. The deafening silence continued. She could still feel this nothingness staring directly at her in the presence of the millions of threads around her. She couldn't move. She couldn't think. All that she could do was keep her eyes closed. Every second felt like torture. It felt like she would never be able to escape. She would never get back to her normal life. Time began to pass. Seconds turned into minutes, turned into hours, turned into days. After what felt like 3 whole days of shutting her eyes as tightly as possible, Khana had grown tired. She could barely stand. She wasn't sure if the threads were still there, or if the void was still staring at her. Terrified yet exhausted, Khana gave up and slowly opened her eyes once more. She was there, in her library once again. The library was dark, illuminated only by the dancing orbs of light above Khana's head. Khana's breath slowly but surely came back to her. She stood up and felt something brush up against her arm. She slowly brought it into view, only to see a sleeve of a robe. Each panel of fabric, of which there seemed to be hundreds, was a different color. Reds, blues, yellows, every color of the rainbow scattered in a random pattern. Some pale, some vibrant, some dark, some light. It almost looked as though the person who made the cloak was trying to put every color possible onto it.